Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson. I'm an adoptive mom of a bright and talented 20-year-old son, Joey, who is struggling to launch into adulthood. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. I'm also a certified coach, helping primarily adoptive parents. Joey and I are committed to helping anyone impacted by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. So I don't know about you listeners, but I love watching Adoptee produced documentaries. Watching their life unfold on screen helps me understand adoption on a much deeper level. Have you ever wondered what it's like behind the scenes of the creation of an adoptee documentary? What does a documentarian learn about themselves while creating their life on screen? Well, today's guest is an adoptee and filmmaker, Kristal Parke. Her acclaimed film, completed in 2023, is called Because She's Adopted. It recently won Best Canadian Documentary at the Vancouver International Movie Awards, and it is gathering more awards as it is making the rounds of the film festivals. Kristal is a Canadian adoptee who was raised in a loving home where her Indigenous roots were acknowledged but not celebrated. The film walks us through her childhood with her two older brothers, her reunion with her birth mother, her struggle with addiction, her intentional reconnection with her Indigenous heritage, and her wrestling with her own identity through life's ups and downs. So thank you for being here on Unraveling Adoption to share your story, Kristal. Glad to have you here.
Hi, Beth. Thank you so much for having me. That introduction I've never heard anything like that said about me before.
Oh, wow.
So, thank you. That was so well written. Can I borrow that?
Sure. I'll copy and paste it to you. Yeah. Well, I just finished watching your film yesterday and I was very moved by all of it, just the skill with which you made it and the depth of feeling involved. You didn't just give us the good parts. You know, you really took us through all the ups and downs of what it's like to be an adopted person, you know, a grown up adult adopted person dealing with this stuff on the daily. So thank you for creating such a beautiful work of art for us to learn, you know, adopted parents like me. And I know adoptees, and I hope many, many people that aren't even affected by adoption are watching it. What were your hopes for the film, and are some of those coming true?
Yeah, my hope for the film was to impact one person.
Check, done that over and over now, huh? Nice.
Yeah. And even as we filmed, the crew was so impacted by the experience. Often the director would say cut, and I'd look around and everyone would be just tears streaming down their face because they just had no idea. How could you, right? Yeah, that initially was what my goal was for that. I will say right off the bat, when I first started filming, I really wanted to be seen by my adoptive mom. And that is why it is so moving to me what you are doing, because what you are doing in listening and validating and elevating our voices, that heals a piece of me. So thank you.
Oh, that means a lot. Oh gosh. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It really does.
Now, your adoptive parents sound like they're lovely, lovely people, and they were supportive of you, gave you a beautiful life. How did they feel about you doing this film?
They were overjoyed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. My adopted mom, she cried and she said, I always knew you were going to do something like this.
Oh.
In her eyes, I was a star. And she always thought that I was going to do something that impacted the world, maybe, you know? And so she supported me greatly and was all for being a part of it and sharing her own experience as being a birth mother as well. So
yeah, that was a major piece of your film, is that your adoptive mother also relinquished a child well before they adopted you, right?
Yeah.
And it was a boy. And he comes into the film and talks. He sounds like an amazing person. He was so empathetic and loving. I was like, oh my gosh, that's beautiful.
I know. So the thing that not everybody knows is that when he came to do that interview at the studio, that was the first time I'd ever actually sat down and talked with him.
Wow.
He had come to a family event, which I met him for the first time at, but we hadn't really had that chance to sit down adoptee to adoptee. And he was just the diamond in the rough.
Yeah.
He said some of the most profound things in the film, and he's probably one of my favorite pieces of the film.
Oh, yeah. It was so powerful, the two of you talking about what you each lost and gained and how you both fit, and the whole gender piece, the whole, your parents wanted a girl and they had these 3 boys, one they relinquished and then 2 other boys that they had biologically, and they wanted a girl, and do you want to tell the story of how your parents got you?
Yeah. So my adopted mom and her sister were both married. And my mom and her husband had 2 boys, and my aunt and her husband had 2 girls. And the opportunity came. There was a woman that was relinquishing a child. And so my aunt and uncle had wanted a boy and would only take me if I was a boy. So then on the opposite side, if I was a girl, I was to go to my mom and dad. And it's one of those stories that you get told as you're growing up, and it just sounds so normal to you. But then when you kind of take a step back and start looking at your childhood or these things that have been told to you over and over and over again, and you really start to think about them from an adult brain, you're like, that's kind of, it gives you a little bit of really? So it's a very unique piece of my story. I don't know if I've ever heard of another adoptee who was sort of chosen based on their gender.
Yeah. They talk about adoptees having a job. Yeah. Your job was to be the girl. And you present as very feminine. And I wonder what it would have been like if you were really a butch kid or something. Like, what if you weren't a girly girl? I mean, you obviously feel comfortable being feminine, but that would have been kind of tragic if you would.
Yeah. And it's funny because growing up with 2 brothers, I roughhoused with the best of them and, played sports. And I think I secretly wanted to be a tomboy in some ways, but I think inherently I really am that feminine girl. Yeah.
Lots of layers there. And then the whole Indigenous piece, it was never a secret from you, but it was never like, yay, let's go to a powwow or let's go celebrate this beautiful culture. Was it, I don't know what it's like in Canada, but here it's like, oh, the poor Native Americans are struggling. Or was it kind of like, oh, looking down a little bit?
Oftentimes I think maybe my mom didn't encourage that piece of me because she didn't want me to suffer any racism or prejudice, but also not even within my family, but within media everywhere. The way that Indigenous peoples were really represented was unfair and not indicative of all Indigenous people.
Certainly, yeah.
So there was certainly a time in my life where I felt like I should be ashamed of being Indigenous. And that was something that I really had to work through myself. And now I can't even imagine that those thoughts went through my head, but it was what I was brought up into, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Now being able to go back to my reserve where I had family and where there's such a rich history and rich culture and people that just embraced me. I think for me, I was afraid I was going to show up and they were all going to reject me and go, what the heck are you doing here?
Yeah.
But they did the exact opposite. They, in fact, named me as a member of the Opaskwayak Creation. And I'm so proud to be a part of that.
Oh.
I am so proud. I wear that with such pride now.
That's beautiful. So, yeah, it was some pretty stunning moments there when you were in Manitoba. And how far, you're in Kelowna, British Columbia. How far away was that trip?
It's about a 24-hour drive. So it's all the way across almost the country.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
24-hour drive with that U-Haul and your crew. And oh my gosh. Yeah.
It was so fun. And we just did not know what we were walking into. We did not know what to expect. And when we got there and I met with the producer that we hired that was on site there, who turned out to be my cousin.
Wow.
And he opened up so many doors for us. And, at that time, when all the residential school stuff was coming forward, the Indigenous people have been sharing about it for years since it happened. It's just that the rest of the world wasn't listening, and finally they were.
Yeah.
And for me, I thought people that went to residential school, it was maybe a few people here, a few people there. But when I got to the Opaskwayak Cree Nation, every single person almost that I met went through residential school.
That's terrifying. Do you want to just explain for our listeners in case they're not familiar so they can become more familiar with what that means? The residential school situation?
Yeah, so there's two parts to it, and the Canadian government had a intentional agenda to essentially assimilate Indigenous people into white culture. Mm-hmm. And so one of the ways that they did that was they sent kids to residential schools. Some of them were day schools. Some of them, they lived there from the time they were in kindergarten until the time they graduated and never saw their family. And it was in those places that they suffered terrible abuse, sexual abuse, and any kind of abuse you could imagine. They suffered it for speaking their language. They weren't allowed to speak their language. Yeah, so that's part one of it. The other part of it was the 60s scoop, which is different. I know that there's a 60s scoop in the States, the baby scoop, but the 60s scoop here in Canada is where children were taken from their lands and adopted into white families to assimilate. And my biological mother was a part of the 60s scoop. They would go as far as putting these babies' pictures in the newspaper, describing them almost as one would a puppy dog trying to adopt out a puppy dog. And it was just despicable what happened. So my birth mom was part of the 60s scoop. She was separated from her brother and then told that he was dead when she went to go look for him. And through ancestry DNA, I was able to actually verify that he was still alive.
Oh my gosh.
And they were able to connect with one another.
Wow. So that's so horrible. So she was an adoptee. Both her and her brother were adopted to separate families.
Yes.
They couldn't even keep them together. That's so damaging. I don't know how often statistically it happens, but certainly there's a lot of adoptees that also relinquish their children. So that must have been very difficult for your birth mother. And you reunited with her a long time ago, right? There was a film of you meeting her in the airport. And
yes. When I was in grade 12, I told my adoptive mom that I wanted to find my biological parents and I wanted them to come to see me graduate. And so my mom went and found my biological mother and my biological father, who we thought was my biological
dun, dun, dun. Watch the film. You'll see what she's talking about.
And so my parents told me on my 17th birthday that they had found her, and we talked on the phone. And then a few months later, my parents and I flew out to Manitoba, which is where she was, and spent the weekend with her. And it was a beautiful weekend. It was one I will never forget. Nice. And I got to meet my older brother. So she had a 2-year-old son in her care when she relinquished me. And so we were able to connect with one another. And
are you still in touch with her?
From time to time, I would say I've taken a little bit of a step back. Reunion is so complicated and it can be so difficult and so triggering. And I'm so grateful that she agreed to be in the film because she is part of my story and I do love her and I do care for her. And it was really beautiful, I think, to showcase that moment that we got to meet in the airport. And it's funny when I look back on that footage, because it was her boyfriend that captured all of that.
Okay.
All the people in the background standing around watching this happen that I look at. And I just think, what were they thinking? Like, did they know what was going on? And
you guys look so alike.
Yeah.
It was amazing. You guys are just like twins. It was really incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's really nice, I guess, that all of the people around you were supportive of you making this film. I think you should have made it anyway, even if people were throwing a hissy fit, but I'm sure it made it a lot easier for you to go knowing that all the main players were supporting you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even your
Yeah.
brothers were in it. And your brothers were so vulnerable too, telling you, at first they were like, what's the big deal? They were kind of in the fog, as they say, right? And it seemed like through the process of making the film, you and them, and maybe a lot of people, maybe the film crew, I don't know, really just learned a lot and made a lot of new understandings. Is that what it felt like?
Yeah. When you do a documentary, you're forced to have conversations that I don't think you would have normally had in real life. It's not like you're going to all meet for Easter dinner and start talking about adoption trauma, right?
You're right. Yeah, how do you think about this?
But
totally.
My oldest brother, Mike, when we were filming, you could see the veil being lifted off of his eyes and the new compassion that he had for me and the understanding he had for me. He had no idea that I felt the way that I did.
Sure.
And he even says in there, this is deep. It cuts to the heart. It's deep. Like you can't imagine. And just for him to say those things, to show up for me the way he did, meant the world to me. When I called him, before I could even get the question out of my mouth, would you be interested in being a part of my documentary and speaking and sharing your perspective? Before I could even get it out of my mouth, he said, you bet, sweetheart.
Aww.
And he's about 15 years older than me, right? He calls me sweetheart.
What a mensch.
He's a very gentle soul. Yeah. And then it was funny because then I called John, the other brother, the one that had been relinquished. And before I could even get the question out of my mouth, he too said, you bet, sweetheart.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so it was just to have them all show up for me. And even my dad's 80 years old. And he had never talked openly about relinquishing ever.
That was some really touching moments with your dad. Whew. Yeah. And how much pain they must have been going through. And shoot, back then, there was nothing. There were no therapists to help anybody with anything, really. But no one was talking about adoption trauma, relinquishment trauma, infertility grief. No one was talking about any of that stuff. Or I don't think they were. I wasn't there, but just that pain. And he was able to go with you on that. I mean, it could have easily gone, shut her down. We're not talking about this. It was fine. We're all fine.
Yeah.
But he was so open and
he was.
Beautiful.
He called me that night and he said, was it okay? Like, is that what you needed? Because, I did it for you. I did it for you. And I find the film so unique because you get so many different angles, so many different perspectives. There's something in the film for everybody to connect with, whether you are a sibling of an adoptee, an adoptive parent, a birth parent,
even the spouse's perspective.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Your husband was with you the whole way. Yeah.
Yes. Well, he's part of the reason why we called it because she's adopted. And it's funny. He jokes around with me if I stub my toe or if I can't do something or if I, anything. Yeah. He'll say, oh, it's because she's adopted.
Kind of like a joke.
She's adopted. Yeah. That's how the name came to be. And I thought it was fitting to add a little bit of levity to such a heavy topic, Yeah.
Well, your film does touch on many topics and even the addiction piece. Your kids are in it just a teeny tiny bit, but obviously you didn't parade them around. But how did they feel about their mom doing this? It probably took a lot of time and you were away from them probably for a while going to Manitoba. And how did they feel? Yeah.
Well, they were with my mom when I did go to Manitoba and they loved being with her.
All right. See you, Mom. And see you later.
that was the last time that they got to spend with her as well. And you'll have to watch the film. Yeah. So they really, I don't know how else to say it, but they almost looked at me differently. And I think they were educated and they gained an appreciation for adopted people. Yeah. I think even for them, knowing kids in their school or their class that have been adopted, they have a compassion for them, that I don't think they would have otherwise. And we did a little screening here in town and they all brought friends. And it means the world to me to have their support. Nice. Yeah. And I think when they go back as adults and watch it again, like how are they going to view it? How are they going to think about it? curious.
Well, they're certainly affected by adoption and they're part Indigenous too. So it's like, this is really important. It doesn't stop with just the day that you were adopted. It goes on for generation after generation, the effects of it. So
it's true. I have met children of adoptees that are having to go out and do the work to find their identity and to find their roots because their parents just didn't want to or couldn't or whatever the case may be. And I think for my kids, there's a nice little like package for them. Like, here, this is where you come from. This is who you are. And that's something that we all get to kind of celebrate together as a family too. So
there's a beautiful shot when you were in Manitoba and you were sitting on that rock and there was beautiful drone footage. Whoever operated a drone did a really great job. And just you just reflecting and just, I could imagine you just feeling grounded and home there. It was very peaceful and centering. Is that how you were feeling sitting on that rock?
Yeah, I think it was the second day of filming and it had been a long day.
I bet. A lot of ups and downs.
And there was a family from the OCN that had us over for a big traditional dinner. And then they said, why don't we all go to Clearwater Lake together? So we went to Clearwater Lake and it's something like the second or third clearest lake in the world or something
amazing.
like that.
Wow.
It's beautiful. It was cold. Yeah. And we saw that rock and I just thought, oh my gosh, how perfect, like for a moment in time as this. And to me, it's so indicative sometimes of how an adoptee feels all alone in the world. And really, nobody could go on this journey except for me. Nobody could tell my story except for me. I truly felt the weight of the world telling the story. I felt like it was a great responsibility, but I had to do it. And sitting on that rock that day, it was so beautiful and peaceful and serene, except when the drone was coming at my face. I thought it was going to hit me in the
Oh my gosh. These are the things we don't think about. Wow. I hope they're good steerers.
That was my drone operator. His name's Jamie Patterson of Patterson Productions. And you're right. He's very talented. And we got lots of great drone footage.
Yeah, it was so well done. Do you want to shout out any of your other crew members?
Yeah, for sure. So my director was James Alton, and he walked through the entire project with me up until editing. He was there, I say, for every tear. And there was so many tears, many, many, many tears. And then, of course, I had a female editor on the project. She is also First Nations, also rediscovering, reconnecting with her heritage. And when I sat down with her, I knew I wanted her to be my editor because she got my story. She got my vision and she honored it to the best of her ability. And I thought she did a beautiful job. It was her idea to put in some of the humor as well, because she said, you just can't have such a heavy film. People are going to walk away feeling depressed. You don't want that. And that was my hope. In the end, I always wanted people to walk away with a sense of hope.
Oh, yeah.
So she actually, it was funny. She does all her editing on her own. She doesn't usually have anyone there with her. And I was by her side through a lot of the editing process by her request, because she said, I don't know what it means to be an adopted person.
Okay.
And so I don't know what's important information and what's not important information to include. So she was great. And I've worked on another project with her since, and we just totally gelled. My whole team. I think in the film, there's a shot of one of our sound guys signing up for a jigging contest when we were in Manitoba. And that guy brought so much joy to the project. That was just... we just had so much fun. It was just a really fun experience as well. When we weren't crying, we were laughing. So
Right. Yeah. It's all over the place, but a lot of fun and a lot of loving moments for sure. I loved the clips of you growing up and as a teenager being goofy and extroverted and hilarious. It did a great job of lightening things up when necessary. I think your editor did a great job. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
We need to close, but I want to know, what is the biggest way you changed by making that film?
I think I came into myself more. I was able to own my story. And I think I was able to see my story for what it was. It wasn't just some outside story that had been told about me or that I had heard over and over and over again. I really owned my story. I think the story integrated from my head to my heart. And I definitely got to know myself more. But most of all, this was the most vulnerable thing I've ever done in my life. And I laid in bed for the 2 years we were shooting with anxiety about putting myself out there. But it was the best thing I ever did.
Nice.
I don't regret it at all.
Well, that's our big job in life, right? To get to know ourselves. So I guess we could all make a documentary. That's one way to do it.
I heard another filmmaker say just recently, it was the most expensive form of therapy ever.
Yes, I'm sure.
I should just say though, where I stand now after doing the documentary, it really was a glimpse of a 2-year period in my life.
Yeah.
And I have grown since then. I have changed since then. I understand adoption in a different way than I ever have before. There's even some things in the film that I probably, if I were to make it today, may have said or done differently. But it's hard because it's this film, this art that's sort of captured in a moment of time, but yet you still continue to grow and evolve as a person.
So we should watch for the sequel. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yes, have to make another film. Yeah, that is the thing about music or film or whatever, a book, you put it out there and then it's static, but it is just a period of time in your life and you are allowed to continue your journey. That's beautiful. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing today. It's interesting to hear some behind the scenes, the impetus behind it all. And how can people watch the film?
So the film is not yet officially released. It should be by fall of 2024, the absolute latest. Right now, I am doing some Zoom online screenings through Higher with Hope and Healing. So just if you stay connected via Facebook or Instagram, it's at Because She's Adopted. That's my handle. Is that?
Yep, handle. That's what kids say.
Called?
Yep.
Also have a website where you can get in touch with me or even book live in-person screenings. So that's kristalparke.net. So KRISTALPARKE.net. No one ever spells my name right.
Both parts of it, they mess up, I bet.
Yeah, we do. Or Kristal at becauseshe'sadopted.com as well.
Okay.
So
we'll find you. We want to support your film. It's really, really beautiful. And thank you very much for going through all that work and self-reflection to create such a piece that we all can learn and grow from and be inspired by your growth and your willingness to be vulnerable and ask the tough questions. And you have a really beautiful family and crew around you. So congratulations.
Thank you, Beth. I really, really appreciate that.
So listeners, please share this episode with anyone you know who might want to hear more about Kristal's film or hear just a beautiful adoptee story. And if you want to find Unraveling Adoption, you can find us at unravelingadoption.com. Come check out all the stuff that we're doing over there. You'll find information about the coaching that I do, and you can sign up for a free 15-minute intro call or a discounted initial coaching session, an hour session for only $35 if you want to just try it out. Come check it out at unravelingadoption.com/coaching. And we want to support adoptees as much as possible and just keep spreading the word for us. Well, thank you all for listening. Kristal and I want you all to stay safe.